Check one, two. Check one. Oh man. Hello. Good evening or morning. Checking my chats. Hey everybody, how's it going? Can you hear me? All right. Neat. Interesting. Okay. Anybody out there? Hey, Misty. Cool. Look at that. Boop. Hey, how about that? You guys see this little logo right here? Says StreamYard. I'm trying a new platform right now. Misty, is the audio coming through and the video, is it coming through all right? I've got new internet at my home, so I don't have to be at a coffee shop, provided everything looks good. All right, thumbs up for Misty. I hope that's a good sign. Hey, Mel. Everything's looking good. Hopefully this internet is paying off. Appreciate y'all. Whoa! Drop my mic. Appreciate y'all bearing with me. Getting things sorted out. I hate that I have to use StreamYard because I hate that little logo. It reminds me of the past interactions with folks, but it's pretty cool. Like, yeah, I can just boop, throw a chat up here. That's pretty slick, and that's worth the switch over, I think. Yeah, Amy, I love my internet so far too. This is cool. They can import the YouTube chat straight into StreamYard, so might have to make the switch over. I'm using the free account right now, but good evening. It is 6 p.m. where I am. If it's different for you, then good afternoon or good night. Welcome to Chasing Billy Live, the Wednesday open forum, the fireside chat with no fire. Sandy says, hi, Balloon Boy. I tell you, that was just a beautiful moment in time. Hey, what? Oh, Mel, yeah, I made you a mod. I can't always check the chats, so you can be a moderator and you can field the questions for me. You can't have direct access to the talent. I need someone like you to field the questions for me, and tell them I'm not in the office and, push appointments back and things like that. So how's everybody doing? Anybody reading any new books? Anybody watching any new shows or movies related to Billy? What's new in Billy world? We were talking earlier. I was talking with Indiana Slatton, Josh Slatton, about what to talk about today, and he kind of brought up we haven't dwelt much on the Lincoln County War. We've talked a lot about two things: Brushy Bill and July 14th. So we could dwell a little bit on other aspects, especially on the Lincoln County War end of things, how it's been kind of painted over the years and decades and, well, century, that there was a good side and a bad side, and that Billy the Kid, our Robin Hood character, our anti-hero, to quote Taylor Swift, the esteemed philosopher, that he fought for the side of right, and that the right side lost to the victors who were politically well connected and well funded, and all that. As far as the politics and the funding go, may be true, but I'd like to spend a little time talking about how Tunstall and McSween and Chisholm were not probably the knights in shining chivalrous armor that we like to portray them in the movies and books. And that's because in movies and books, you need clear-cut villains and clear-cut heroes. You need a good versus bad. That's the whole conflict. That's the point of telling a story. In history, I believe that, as far as Tunstall goes, we have him on record writing a letter to his father, who, he says, "I intend to make 50 cents on every dollar spent in Lincoln." He was honestly, he didn't want to bring justice to Lincoln and fix what Murphy had wrecked. He wanted to be Murphy. He wanted to be the new Murphy in town. That's what he set out to do. That's what McSween set out to help him with. They had a plan, and that plan was to take over Lincoln from Murphy, not to give it back to the people or some noble endeavor. Um, so there wasn't really a good side and a bad side in the Lincoln War. A lot of these guys who survived, like Dolan, they went on to live really, quiet, normal lives, as far as I can tell. A lot of them settled down. They didn't just go on to initiate some reign of terror and set up some evil regime in Lincoln. I mean, it just, things went on as normal. It was just about who cut the check at the end of the day. Yeah, John Tunstall wanted that paycheck, and he wanted the beef contracts along with Chisholm, and they wanted to run things. They wanted their own ring, and the people who were already there, the Murphys, the Dolans, the Rileys, they were already established. They didn't want that to happen. And the thing about Tunstall and McSween and Chisholm, to an extent, as far as their own characters went, they wanted to rule with the law a little more than the Murphy faction. Murphy had politicians in their pocket, sure, but Tunstall wanted to get all of this done legally. McSween as well. They thought that they could play by the book and follow the letter of the law, and their rights as businessmen would give Lincoln to them. Lincoln would just fall right into their hands. What they didn't factor in, I don't think, and it doesn't seem to be the case, is that the Murphy faction and Dolan would just flat out kill him. Tunstall thought, I'm going to come in here and steal the business from Murphy and Dolan, and I'm going to establish my own monopoly on things, and I'm going to run this town, and I'm going to do it legally, and it's well within my rights to do. This is America, and I'm here to play ball, and I'll play by the rules and win. And Dolan and the Murphy Dolan faction said, no, we'll just kill you. And that's how it shook out. And I don't think, Tunstall should have taken that seriously, but it doesn't seem like they did. Sandy says, I wonder why he went there. He could have went anywhere without any problems. Yeah, Tunstall, I think you're talking about Tunstall, and I agree. He was funded by his rich dad, and his dad seemed to dote on him and give him whatever he asked for. Tunstall was in Canada. He was working for his dad's firm up there. He kind of had a run-in with some fellow employees up there. They didn't really get along. He was unhappy. So he was like, Dad, I want to go down to California and get into sheep ranching. And the folks in California were like, business is kind of already settled here. You're really not going to get a good foot in. What you really should do is look into cattle. And then Tunstall kind of made his way over to New Mexico on the word of some folks there. But I don't know. I don't know why he chose to stay in Lincoln and fight. Maybe he really formed a good alliance with McSween, and he met Weidenman. And oh my goodness, to bring that up, there's so much we don't know. And I was talking with James Mills yesterday about historians and things like that. And I consider myself, like Jason Cornwell calls folks, jokingly, not meanly, but I consider myself a quote hobby historian. I didn't go to school for this. I just read a lot of books, and somebody gave me a camera and a mic, and I talk and I write. But I'm not, I didn't go to school to be a historian. There's no like PhD or anything after my name. So yeah, I'm an armchair researcher. I'm a hobby historian. But given that, me and Mills were talking the other day, and he said, every historian should feel completely comfortable. I'll have to look up the direct quote, but he said everybody should feel comfortable saying, "I don't know." That should be a regular phrase in a historian's database. And hey, David, and we don't do that a lot, but to kind of riff off that point, there is so much we don't know. And when we talk about Tunstall choosing to stay in Lincoln, choosing that life there when it obviously got so hot, he could have just taken off and asked dad for more money and started his investments elsewhere. He would have been better off with it. But, one thing I suspect, and I don't want to get off too off into the weeds and speculation, and this is 100% speculation. Um, I kind of feel like he and Weideman had a romantic relationship. I think Tunstall might have been gay. I think he and Weideman might have had a thing going. I don't think that's too far fetched. Uh, Nobody liked Weideman. None of the regulators, hardly anybody liked him. But Tunstall treated him like his best friend. And it just, that whole relationship dynamic has always seemed to me to be a gay relationship in a time period there were obviously that was something you kept heavily under wraps. So perhaps Sandy, that's one reason why he stayed. Weidenman was the first man he met coming into Lincoln, I believe, at the hotel. And this guy with probably a bit of a German accent from New York or wherever. And um it just, maybe he wanted to stay there because Weideman was there, and that's where they had chosen to, I don't know, make their stand or whatever. But I don't mean to offend anyone or make anyone mad, and I'm not out there, trying to make definitive statements or be provocative. That's just the vibe I get, just looking at all the like context clues and the circumstantial things. Yeah. Um, Robin says that Tunstall also had absolutely no interest in women romantically. Um, yeah, he didn't seem to, and it's just him and Weidman. Man, there's just that feeling, and I'm not disparaging that or talking trash about that or saying it's positive or negative. I'm just saying that's seems to be my observation. And Mel said they met in Santa Fe. Yeah, what did I say? Did I say Vegas or? I don't know, but yeah, I think you're right. They did meet in Santa Fe. Is that where Herlo's hotel is? Maybe, I don't know. Again, just showing off my armchair researcher stuff. And yeah, Misty says dog feeder boy. Yeah, I always like to call Weideman the dog feeder. And one time, if I'm ever in a position where I want to play Switzerland in a situation or something, I always say, I was just feeding the dog. That's my way of saying I'm not in it. Hey, I was just feeding the dog. Maybe we could make a t-shirt out of that. I was just feeding the dog. Very Oscar Wilde. Yeah, I kind of get that vibe, man. I get that Oscar Wilde, they're going to throw me in jail if they find out too much about me kind of vibe. Um, Colin says, did Weideman make the introduction to McSween? That I can't remember offhand. He may have. I'm pretty confident that it was Weideman that Tunstall met first, and Weideman may have directed him toward Lincoln. I don't remember how he met McSween, but it may have been through Weideman. Um, Mel's like, yes, that's how it happened. Mel is brushed up on this LC Dub era. Um, that's awesome. Yeah, that's probably how it happened. And you look at McSween. Yes, Misty said that Weideman went on to be a politician. Yeah, if you want to get real deep into research, Weidman has an entry in Wikipedia. I think he does. He did when I looked at it, and it said that like he was very paranoid, even into his politician days back in New York and maybe DC. That he was always kind of looking over his shoulder, thinking someone was going to get him for the Lincoln County War stuff. That's kind of wild. But see, I mean that shows you like once Tunstall died, all that kind of fizzled out. Weidman kind of like got out of Dodge. So he was really only there for Tunstall and didn't have kind of any other interest in the matter. And then he went back to New York. So it was kind of like Man, I wonder if that just kinda broke him or, it just again further buttresses my theory that they had a relationship going on. Um, but yeah, I and he Weidman wrote letters too. He kept up communications with, Tunstall's father and kept him apprised of stuff. Mel said it was also at the hotel he met McSween, but not sure who introduced who to who. Yeah, there's so much to this whole story. Starting in New York with the birth of Billy and ending at Fort Sumner, that it's hard to keep this stuff all in your head fresh all the time. But you can read it 12 times and forget it and need to go back again. Um, Misty said that Weidman didn't want his past to come out of the closet. Yeah, maybe so. I did read in a letter, I believe, from Don Klein to Leon Metz, and they were talking about it. They used words that were acceptable in the 80s that are no longer acceptable, but um, they were talking about Weidman and Tunstall, and they said something about Nolan telling them about a rumor that had to do with that, and it was pretty explicit, but they didn't quote a source or anything. This was just a personal letter, and I'd love to know where they found that out. Um, if I find it again, I will post it, censored, of course, on the community page. But it was so that theory's obviously been kicked around for a while, and who knows? It's I think it's plausible, highly likely. But getting back to the whole idea of one side being morally virtuous and the other being contemptibly evil, McSween, I do believe McSween intended to defraud somebody of that Fritz inheritance money, and I think that he used it to fund and get the Tunstall store going. Um, I think oh cool. Misty said that Weidman came to London and visited the Tunstalls, and Bat Masterson interviewed him once. That's awesome. I didn't know he came to London, and I certainly didn't know that Bat Masterson interviewed him. So I would like to look into both of those things. Colin says, I'd love to read the Bat interview. Me too. I think that'd be awesome. Misty, it is your responsibility to locate this stuff for us and get it to me. You've been put on a job. You have been voluntold to gather this information. Misty is now the Weidman researcher of Chasing Billy Community. Thank you, Misty, for volunteering your services for that. Um, but I do think that McSween intentionally withheld that insurance money and intended to use it for his own good. Hey Joy, I do think that he did not have virtuous intents, and um, yeah, he kept that 10,000 insurance money. It was probably more like 7,000 or so after his expenses because he had to go to New York and argue with the company that the policy was in, and then he told the Fritz and heirs. He told Emil, was it Emil or Charles, and Emily, the the children of the Fritz, or the brother and sister, I can't remember, but he told them that there possibly was another heir in Germany, and he had to sort this out before he could release the funds to anybody. And then he would say stuff like Murphy's trying to get it, and I just don't buy it. I don't buy McSween's virtue. I don't buy that he was just a on the level guy. I think his intentions were just as shady and murky as those of Murphy's and Dolan's. Um, and yeah, I think he kept that insurance money, and I think they used it to fund the store. I think Miss McSween, Susan, in later years even admitted that McSween used that money to get the store going and possibly the bank. I'm not sure. And like Mills said in our other interview, we really don't know how deeply Chisholm was involved. Um, he was he's almost the one that you have the most ambivalent recollections from folks on, because he a lot of folks, the Seven Rivers guys, they hated him. They accused him of driving out small ranchers, but then others testified that he was a good person and honorable in his dealings with all ranchers and all people in the area. And uh, so I'm not really sure which to believe, and I'll have to research it further. But Chisholm, Tunstall, McSween, these guys, obviously, Chisholm wanted a successful large ranch and he wanted beef contracts and he wanted all of that. So he started a bank. They were going to have their own bank in Lincoln. These guys wanted to run things, and Murphy and Dolan currently ran things. So one of them had to lose. And this wasn't a fight for justice. This wasn't a fight, for the victory of good and honor over evil. This was a fight of Group A wants to make money that Group B is already making. And so Group B's got to go. And they knew this. I mean, McSween and Tunstall and Chisholm, they said that Chisholm could carry, he didn't carry a gun, but he had one on his horse, a revolver. And, McSween was against carrying a gun at all. Let me see here. Laura Shropshire, have to do this on my phone and won't be listening for a few moments. But has anyone ever seriously considered Tunstall's pathologies? He was a Freudian delight to steal from the Caine Mutiny. Yeah, we've been talking a little bit about that, Laura. And yeah, I mean, even his dealings, like the way he talked with his sister, and it's just, yeah, he was a Freudian delight. That's a really good way to put it. He was definitely a psychological study. And Misty says, in my opinion, Chisholm was way more involved. Yeah, I agree. I wish we knew how much, but he was pretty slick. And he ended up getting arrested when him and McSween and Susan McSween were trying to head out of town for a while. And I think that was up in Vegas or maybe Santa Fe again. But he played hardball with them up there too. And they were trying to just get him on any charge they could. But yeah, these guys, what I was saying about the revolver and carrying guns, and McSween was ardently opposed to carrying a weapon. John had some type of pistol, but he was by no means a gunfighter. These guys liked to carry about their virtues and their ideas about being law-abiding citizens and being above weaponry and being, too civilized for all that. That's kind of the vibe that you get. Yet they hired gunmen, by the dozens to make sure that they could fight when it came down to it. And McSween and Tunstall and Chisholm, they acted like they were above fighting, but at the same time, they were gonna fight. It just wasn't gonna be them who slung the bullets. And I think that more than being hired hands and ranchers, I think Kid Antrim, William H. Bonney, Charlie Beaudry, Henry Brown, John Middleton, these guys were hired to be gunfighters. They were hired guns, and I think a lot of their motives were more transactional than we like to imagine. When we try to tell the story, I think a lot of them were just in it for a paycheck, and that's what they knew how to do. And it wasn't about, even for the regulators, some of them, I'm sure it was more about, I just want my day's wages than it was about, we have to avenge Tunstall. And as long as McSween was able to pay, then that was good. We retrospectively put a lot of virtues and ideals onto these folks that I don't think were there to begin with. Laura said, my personal theory, Tunstall's parents sent him to Vancouver to get him out of the house and away from his sister. Man, that's a heavy theory, and you might not be wrong on that. Again, when you read the letters that he sends to his sister, you can't help but have this thought of like, that's certainly weird. That's very interesting the way you talk to your sister, John. It's what did he call his sister? He called her something, and it was like a pet name, and it was like, man, this is I don't feel like I should be reading these letters. Um, very odd. So yeah, Laura, you may be onto something there again. Without like very explicit proof of any of these ideas, it's hard to say, but it's definitely worth the speculating, in my opinion. Um, Paul, good to see you, man. You're at work, but you made it. That's right. Boss makes a dollar, I make a dime. That's why I watch Cardi K on company time. Remember that. uh, might be Tunstall was catalyst for Chisholm to push back on the house. Yeah, Chisholm's he'd probably been looking for it for a little bit, and he found in Tunstall a well-funded principal player. And, it was probably a win-win for Chisholm to partner up with him and offer a little bit on his end and offer to front it a little bit, and then you get some of John's daddy's money, and everything works out in the end. Paul says, don't forget Dirty Steve. I wish we knew more about Dirty Steve. We don't know much about him at all. Okay, Colin, you're now the resident Dirty Steve researcher for the Chasing Billy community. It is now your job to gather sources and inform us. Thank you for volunteering your services in this matter. Winky says Billy never got his money from Chisholm. Yeah, and I think I think these accounts are probably accurate. I know in that letter that there's a letter that John Middleton wrote to Tunstall's father that said that McSween owed him $500 for, fighting. And he was trying to get that from Tunstall's dad. And so we know that these guys were promised pay. And I bet you anything that once all that fell apart, Chisholm lost, Tunstall and McSween are dead. No, he's not going to go around and pay everybody. Of course not. And these are outlaws. These are, specks on the moral whiteboard of society in this area. And who's going to get onto Chisholm if he just refuses to pay him? I'm sure he wasn't even concerned about it. And that's where all that came from. And, I don't know. That's a cool scene in Young Guns too, when Billy's like, that's $5, that's $10. And, even the newspapers say that he says something like that, for every man he kills, he'll take $5 off the bill. But maybe there's some truth to the fact that Chisholm did owe Billy money. Maybe so. Well, I would say more than maybe. It's probably likely. Mel said maybe John confided in his sister that he was gay and they were super close because of it. Another very good observation. That's another more positive angle. And that's the kind of scenario that I could see happening. That happens a lot today with people, and especially maybe around the 90s and early 2000s when it was just becoming something people talked about and accepted. And but I'm sure in a day, in the late 19th century, that's a heavy thing to confide in someone. And if you do that, and if you trust them to that level, you're definitely going to be very close with them. So interesting. David says, whose book did you prefer between Utley and Nolan? I think I like Nolan's for presentation. I like the fact that it's kind of a bigger book. It's kind of laid out more like a textbook, which is certainly how it reads. So it's consistent in that vein. It's very comprehensive. I do like Nolan's book. I think Utley's is more of an enjoyable read. I enjoyed it as far as readability goes. But presentation and layout, I like Nolan's. As far as readability goes, and in terms of the information you're going to get, I really prefer James Mills' Bandito Simpatico. I think, again, it is just amazingly written. And especially if you're new to Billy and you're wanting to get the whole story, you're not going to find one that's more engaging than that. So my ranking, for my own personal pleasure of reading a comprehensive Billy biography would be Mills, Utley, and then Nolan in terms of readability and enjoyment and engagement. So yeah, but also enjoy I like Nolan's Lincoln County War book more than the west of Billy the Kid. His documentary history of Lincoln County War is very cool, and that's where I came across a lot of excerpts from Tunstall's letters and things like that. I want to read Nolan's book on Tunstall, but it's like $9,000 everywhere, when you try to find it. But I'm sure that's a good book too. Nolan uh, got a few things wrong though, and that's the thing. Like we're always learning more and discovering more and correcting old mistakes. So there's going to have to be new books written all the time. For instance, Nolan says that William H. Antrim in the Civil War took a wrongful drafting case to the Supreme Court in Pennsylvania and won. And that was not our William Antrim. In fact, that's where they get the name William H. Antrim from this guy in Pennsylvania whose mother was sick. And this guy was wounded in the Civil War. Just completely different guy. I don't believe there's any documentation that suggests that our William Antrim's name was William H. Antrim. So far as we can tell in those documents, just William H. Antrim. He never went to Pennsylvania in the Civil War. His only service was in the Indiana Infantry for a matter of a month or more. Never saw any combat. He may have been stationed in Indianapolis, and he got out, wasn't wounded, and never went to the Supreme Court. So that was a mistake. Nolan confused those two guys together. And Josh, in our show on Coyote Springs the other day, pulled out another instance where he confuses a J. Bell with J.W. Bell, who was killed by Billy the Kid. So this stuff happens, and that's why a lot of times historians are quoted like they're saints, that are infallible, but nobody in this industry is infallible. We're all going to make mistakes and going to assume the wrong things, and we have to be willing to be corrected on it and accept that when we're wrong, we need to change our conception of how things went down, which a lot of folks don't do, and it's a shame. Laura says, didn't George Coase say Dirty Steve was dirty as in underhanded, not physically dirty? I can't remember either, Laura. I've only read Frontier Fighter once, and if he said it in there, I don't remember, but if it was an interview somewhere, it's hard to say. Paul says, are you implying that Chisholm liked educating young boys? Nice. I get it. I see what you did there. No need to elaborate, Ruddick. That was good. I even heard Murphy in Murphy's accent as I read it. Paul says James Mills is an easy read, loving it. Yeah, man, it was a page turner. I just enjoyed it. It's just good stuff. David says, is there any big news meant to be coming out about the kid, i.e. DNA, etc., that you've heard about, even if you're not allowed to say what it is? No, I think they're just still waiting on developments in the DNA thing. I haven't heard anything new on any of that. And there's always stuff kind of being researched and, proven sufficiently to make the case for publicly. And there's things out there, especially if you know Steve Cedarwall. The guy is just a treasure trove of info that he's known about for 20 years that nobody else knows about, and he'll pull something out and be like, hey, did you know this? And your mind is blown, and he's like, oh, we've just been sitting on it for 20 years. But the thing is, there's a difference between knowing these things and seeing them, and then on the other hand verifying them and authenticating them and making sure it all checks out before you present it to the public and create a shitstorm. And then that's how you end up 10 years down the line with something that's not legitimate that everybody's saying is legitimate. So you just got to be very careful about not jumping the gun. So I've seen some cool things, and I've read some cool things, and really really cool stuff that you just can't, no matter how you feel about it, you got to do your due diligence before just throwing it out there. Otherwise, people will take it and run with it, and then you find out it's inauthentic or wrong or incorrect, and then by that time it's already too late. It's already made its Facebook rounds, and the next thing you know, it's in textbooks, and you're having to tell people years later it's not legitimate. And that's something, people feel strongly about the croquet photo, and it may be legit. And my friend Susan Stevenson, she's one of the researchers that connected it to the Beaudry family, and I believe David Turk did too. I'm not too sure, but I respect David's work as well, and I give them the benefit of the doubt on that. It doesn't look like any of the of Billy stuff to me. I would not accept it if uh, it was not connected to the research of people that I respect. And even as it is, I'm just ambivalent about it and kind of on the fence. But I think Randy, the owner of that, should have held on tight to it for a little bit. They shouldn't have done a documentary on it just yet. I think it could have been researched in private before just flooding the market with it. And now we're just more confused. But that's just me. I just want things to be done and researched before it's put out there. But um, anyway, yeah, there's cool stuff. I will give you one thing, David, and anyone else interested is the coalition came across something, uh, a possible photo of a young Joe Antrim, and it is in a collection of a guy who we're talking to who has a ton of stuff. Um, and this was one of them. And the reason that I think it was Joe Antrim is it's connected to a photographer who I encountered in my research on Joe and the possible nephew of Billy. So, I might be able to show the picture if I can figure out how to share. Since it's published in our coalition journal. Um, it's probably going to take a long time for me to find it. Maybe I'll post it in the community feed. Um, but it's published in our journal, and I did an article about Joe Antrim in there in our most recent journal. It's going to be coming out soon, and we include a picture of this guy, and we don't claim it's with any certainty that it's Joe. To me, it looks like a dead ringer for Joe. The old picture that we have of him in 1929, 1930, it looks a just a clear. To me, it looks like the same person. I could be wrong, and I'm not making any definite case for that. But anyway, when I was researching Joe Antrim with Susan Stevenson, Joe Antrim married a woman named Jenny Stone in Colorado in around 1891 or so, something like that. And we were trying to track down this Jenny Stone. And on the 1880 census, I believe there was a Jenny Stone who lived in the same, relatively same area, I believe, as Joe, or just in an area that Joe was known to frequent. May have been Leadville. Um, and this Jenny Stone lived in the house of her brother-in-law, and her brother-in-law's name was John T. Needles. And John T. Needles was a photographer who'd moved to Colorado from St. Joseph, Missouri. And this picture that this guy had in this collection who contacted the coalition, he has this picture of a young man who some would, think, well, is this Billy because it's in this collection? But when I saw it, I said, well, that could be Joe. And then I saw the back of the photo, and the back of the photo says John T. Needles, photographer. And I thought it's a big coincidental path to take, that you end up with a Joseph Antrim who marries a Jenny Stone. There's a Jenny Stone on a census living with a John T. Needles, and there's a John T. Needles who took a photo of this guy who looks just like Joe, who shows up in the collection of a guy who collects stuff like this. It's just, there are a lot of coincidences in this scenario. So we decided to publish the photos, kind of just a speculation. It's not claimed to be Joe. I think it really could be. But it's interesting. So that's an example of a new thing that we're looking at. And this stuff is happening all the time. You never know. There a lot of private collectors over the years would just get these things and hang on to them in their private collection. You never hear about it. And as they pass on, as they decide to sell things, they pop up and it fills in some gaps and you learn some new stuff. It's very cool. I'm sorry I took y'all down that rabbit trail and got lost in the chat and everything. Winky said the Coyote Springs episode was so good. Yeah, it's awesome. It's one of the coolest things he's found. Uh, my favorite part about that episode was the moment we took for Jane Greathouse. I've said it repeatedly. I'm here for the jokes, but Josh brought the serious geographical finds, and that was really cool. Respect to Josh for the Coyote Springs work. It's very cool. Really, really proud of that for him and the coalition. He did great stuff there. Someone said that they thought that container that he showed was an opium jar, so that's a possibility. And another guy said it was Billy's Weed Stash, and I said that'd be a really cool name for a band. If I ever start another band, it's going to be called Billy's Weed Stash. Paul says this ain't an official chat without the hat. Where's the hat? The hat is in my car, and the car my wife took somewhere, so the hat is unavailable. And I didn't want to give y'all the full fro with my hair. So Winky says, now I want to see the photo. It will be in our coalition press coming out. If you're a member of the coalition, it'll be mailed to you, I believe. Or I think if you're a member of the coalition, you get one mailed to you. If you're not, you can still buy one off Amazon. So it'll be in there, and along with my article on Joe Antrim. It's a pretty neat article. It examines a few different views of Joe and possibly some things he might have done. Winky said your hair looks like Billy's. Does it? Does it look like Billy's? Yeah, it's a little wild. And you know, there's a lot more gray in it than there used to be. So if only Billy could have made it to the age where he got gray hair, he probably would have made good use of it. I imagine Billy would have been quite an industrious individual had he gone down the, more peaceful paths. But I think he was a victim of circumstance. It's not like he chose to be a horse and cattle thief, or that he chose to be a gunfighter or whatever you want to call it. Just, sometimes things happen, and I have a song lyric. It says, it's not what you make of it, it's what it makes of you. And I feel like that applies to Billy. So yeah. Anyway, we were talking about the Lincoln County War. There's no good guys or bad guys. Tunstall was probably gay. We've covered a lot of ground today. Maybe without the hat, more ideas flow out freely. It looks like a lot of you guys are reading Mill's book. It's a good book. I enjoy it. I recommend it. Definitely encourage you to do that. I am currently reading about 4 books. I'm reading Mag's books right now. I bought them. Might as well read them. So I'm on book 3 of his series right now. I've got a couple fiction books in the mail, some old 70s paperback westerns based on Billy the Kid. One of which is this right here, The Trail of Billy the Kid. True story behind one of the Old West's greatest legends by Robert Edmond Alter. Don't know a thing about it. Looks like a fictional novel. A lot of novels back then did the whole true story, even though it was a novel, and people would lose their crap over it. Morrison did a whole campaign against this guy. William Morrison, Brushy Bill lawyer, did a whole campaign against Edwin Curl for writing a novel called Billy the Kid. And he basically told Coral that you don't know anything about Billy. How dare you mislead people? And Coral wrote back and said, basically, that was just a novel. You need to chill out. But yeah, I'm always reading Billy stuff, and there's always new stuff to learn. and you forget so much that I'm usually rereading books too. Um, Billy was a boy thrown into a man's world. That's true. He just had so many lessons he had to learn the hard way. Um, and his mom died. I'm sure he had this huge abandonment issues. His mom died. He was stuck in Silver City without anybody. I'm not sure his brother Joe was much help at the time. Um, I'm sure for so many times in his life, he felt like he didn't have a friend or family member in the world he could depend on. Maybe that's why pals were so important to him. And maybe that's why he was so fiercely loyal to the people that showed him kindness and who offered him friendship. He would cut off his nose to spite his face if it meant being loyal to a friend or avenging something that happened to them. So I think that's a commendable character trait. And I think that came out of his sense of not having anybody so many times. So many times, I bet he probably just felt alone and almost to the point of panic. When I was working on my Billy book, I kind of had this scene in Camp Grant, when he's just on the run from Silver City and he wakes up, he's staying in this room above the hog ranch, the brothel, and it's all just crazy, people partying everywhere, and he wakes up in a room, he's just had a bad dream, and he's just like oppressed, and the weight of his being alone is just bearing down on him so much. And I think that's a very important part of who he was, and I think that formed a big part of who he was. He was on his own way too much, way more than any human should have been, and I definitely think that affected him. Um, Colin says he was a man in a boy's body. Yep, and Mel says The Curse of Billy the Kid by Tamsin Silver is a great novel. I highly recommend it. I have hers. What is that, a trilogy, Mel? I have those on Kindle. So I do look forward to reading those at some point. Laura says, and why he couldn't leave Sumner. Yeah, I mean, I feel like Billy had finally found a home at Fort Sumner, and he finally had an identity. He was finally, putting a life together. And even I think that life probably would have kept including horse and cattle theft. But he, he was somebody, and he had friends who knew Billy. He was somebody to other people, and I think that was important to him. And um, I don't think he wanted to let that go. I mean, to go to Old Mexico, to go to another part of the country in the U.S. even, it would have been to leave these people and to start over, and to once again be unknown, and to once again have no friends, and to just be at the mercy of an indifferent universe again. And that's why I think Billy could never have been silent if Pat would have let him live. I mean, that goes back to that logic of like, why would Pat let him go and stake his entire reputation and his entire ambitions in life and his character and everything on the bet that William Bonney would stay quiet? I just don't believe it, and I don't believe Billy would have. Um, yeah, it's a trilogy of books that Tamsin Silver wrote. I'll check those out. I'm glad to hear that you think it's a great novel. So that's just more things on my stack of books to read, in addition to all the research I have to do and things like that take up my time and will probably get me fired eventually, um, because I neglect the real world so I can live in Billy's, like we all do, I'm sure, to an extent. Um, but yeah, I just wanted to talk about that tonight, about there's no good or bad side in this story. Um, I take that even, to Pat Garrett. I'm not one of the people that think Pat was a villainous coward who, he's not the bad guy in this tale either. There are no bad guys. There are no good guys. Uh, there were people trying to make money. There were people trying to make a living. There were people trying to stay alive. And like Brushy says, it was dog eat dog. That's all. Joy says, do I ever sleep? Yeah, I probably sleep too much. I love sleep. Yeah, I do manage to find sleep in there. Uh, Laura says he didn't have anyone to run to. Waite went back to his family. The Coes went back to their family, or anyone close to run with. The Coes again. Yep. And Skurlock, Doc went to Texas and started a family. Well, he was already married, but he did the family thing in Texas. Henry Brown and Middleton, I believe they left together. They went up to Kansas, and then Henry Brown became a marshal, and he got shot in 1884 robbing a bank while he was still, the lawman in another town. Uh, Insane. He went to Medicine Lodge, Kansas, and got shot and killed while he was the peace officer in Caldwell, Kansas. And they'd given Henry Newton Brown a golden engraved rifle as a token of appreciation for his law enforcement services, and then he forms a gang and goes and tries to rob a bank in Medicine Lodge. These guys, we don't know what happened to Jim French, but yeah, a lot of these guys they went on to do the family thing. They bought farms, they got out of it, and Billy didn't have a lot of that to fall back on, and um, man, I don't know. Maybe he had some vendetta over the Tunstall killing. Maybe he still wanted to kill a few people. Maybe he wanted to still, Coe says that he told him, "Y'all can do what you want, but I'm going to stay here and steal me a living." And if that's the case, he still thought that he was owed something from Chisholm, or that's just how he wanted to live his life by stealing cattle. Maybe he enjoyed that. Maybe he liked it. Who knows? Paul says, for all his loss and difficulties, it's amazing he kept his sense of humor and some level of morality. And yeah, I think you're exactly right on both of those counts. He had a sense of humor that I think endeared him to a lot of people, and he had a charm about him. And I think that's why we still talk about him today. And he also had morality. He was not anything like a lot of these outlaws. I think that's also why we remember him to this day. He was no Jesse James. I mean, we change who Jesse James was so we can remember him and tell stories about him. He was really probably a bit of a sociopathic killer, just terrible, some of the stuff he did. But I think we gloss that over. But I don't think we really do that with Billy. If anything, they lied about Billy to make him into the outlaw. Early papers would say he would shoot a man just to see him kick, and all this crazy stuff made him out to be a serial killer almost. But in truth, all of his shooting scrapes were either initiated by the other person or some sort of vendetta or vengeance shootout that involved other people. And it doesn't seem like he relished or rejoiced in killing or anything. He may have enjoyed stealing cattle, because he definitely showed no signs of quitting, but maybe it was just very lucrative and easy to do back then. I don't know. Uh, it's something else we need to remember is that the world of the 1870s and 1880s in, frontier territory is so foreign to us that almost any time we try to apply our logic to it, we probably fall short of the mark. But we'll always do that. We can't help but do that. But we don't know what it was like to steal cattle, especially because Billy doesn't seem to have stolen cattle from small ranchers or people that, you know, were poor or who couldn't have survived the theft. He seems to have stolen mainly from Chisholm. So maybe he just stole from someone who thought he owed that he thought was owed money. And a lot of the folks he stole from was more like he borrowed from him and gave it back. A lot of folks would say he always either returned what he stole or gave him something better. For instance, I've got 5 minutes here, but for instance, Francisco Trujillo, in his recollections of the Lincoln County War, when the kid was with the boys and they freed Jesse Evans and company from the Lincoln jail, they ran into Francisco. They held him at gunpoint along with his brother, and they said, "Give me your saddle and your gun." And Billy took his saddle. And I think he even told him then, "I'll get it back to you, Francisco." They called him Kiko. And then later when they killed the Indian, Manuel Segovia, it was Doc and Chavez and Billy and Francisco and maybe some others. Billy took the Indian saddle and was like, "Hey, Francisco, I owe you a saddle," and gave it back to him. So I mean, he was always making good on the things he did. I just think that's a really quirky trait. You've got this notorious outlaw thief who likes to give things back. It's just funny. Um, Sandy says another enjoyable evening with everyone. Person turquoise waving. I don't know if that's an emoji that didn't come through, but that's awesome. That could be a t-shirt too. Person turquoise waving. Misty says my dog was called Chico. Right on. My dog that I brought back from Texas on my trip out to Lincoln is we call her Bonnie, and we've named her Wilhelmina Henrietta Bonnie. She's female, so we gave her William Henry Bonnie's name, but it's Wilhelmina Henrietta Bonnie. Laura says after Billy died, a biography makes him out to be a psychopath. After James died, a biography came out making him out to be a man for the people. Yeah, I agree. Jesse James was not a man for the people. As far as I can tell, I've not dug into Jesse James as much as I have Billy. I have honestly learned more about J. Frank Dalton than the real Jesse James, but he seems to me to be a psychopath, a sociopathic butcher of people, especially when he was a Confederate in the Civil War. But people have turned him into a folk hero, and they did the exact opposite with Billy the Kid. They made him in to someone who resembles Charles Manson back then, and it was just the total opposite was the reality. But that's showbiz, baby. That's what they say. I appreciate y'all being here and hanging out with me during my first broadcast back in my studio in my home office. No more having to go to the coffee shop and sitting under that dome light and having people walk by getting stuff out of the fridge. So yeah, thank you for being here, and thanks for listening, and thanks for contributing. This show would probably only be 20 minutes if you guys didn't chat and throw stuff out. And I enjoy hanging out with you guys every week. And in addition to the pre-recorded content, I dig just coming here and hanging out and chatting and seeing the familiar faces. And if anybody wants to hop on camera with me, we can probably do that. Anybody just wants to hang out and talk voice to voice and hang out, we'll get that set up. But thank you all. Hope you all have a good week. Holidays are coming up, and we'll keep doing this, and we'll get more content out to you throughout the week. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you tell your friends to subscribe, and let's keep building it up. And let's spread the good word of Billy. Billy lives. Y'all take it easy. Have a good night.